What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to look at another flavor of MVVM. Here's the app we're going to put together. Nothing too fancy. We're just going to make an API call and get this list of users. But the more interesting thing that we'll look at is how to use the event bus model in MVVM, which is the notion of using publishers and subscribers. And we're going to implement it ourselves. No frameworks, no dependencies, none of that. So if that all sounds good, make sure you start by destroying that like button down below. Also, for those of you who are, subscribers, thank you so much. We just hit 25K. And on that note, if you're not a subscriber, take a quick second to smash that subscribe button while you're at it. So that all said, let's get into the video. All right, we're gonna get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project here. I'm gonna stick with the app template under iOS, and let's go ahead and call this MVVM bindings bus. And we'll see why we're gonna use the term bus here momentarily. So make sure your language is set to Swift, your lifecycle is UIKit, and your interface is storyboard. Go ahead and continue, save the project wherever you'd like. And first things first, let's go ahead and expand our Xcode window and close this right panel since we're not going to be needing it. And I'm going to jump into our view controller file. So the app we're going to build out, like you saw, is just going to fetch and show a list of users, but we're going to focus on the binding between what we are going to call a event bus and events. So the first thing I'm going to do here is simply create a function called fetch data. We're going to be moving this business logic into our view model, but let's just put it here for the time being since I'm going to forget to paste in the URL that I've copied already. So now that we've gone ahead and done that, let's talk about this concept of an event bus and a event. The idea here is that there's going to be an object called a bus, which is going to be responsible for subscriptions and publications of particular events. So one object can subscribe to being notified when a particular event occurs, and then the bus can also be used to actually post those events once they do occur. So there's a first thing we want to do in here, which is create a shared instance of this. So we'll say we have a shared bus, and we're going to privatize the initializer. Now the bus, like I mentioned, can take in a observer, so it can create subscriptions and it can also publish. So we're going to say bus dot, we're going to have a function on here. This is going to be publish. Some people like to call it post as well. And there's also going to be a function on here, which is going to be either observe or subscribe. Both of those are proper naming conventions that are popularly used. So cool, so now that we have these two APIs here, what we want to actually go ahead and do is create a notion of an event. And what I'm going to do to make things a little cleaner is we're going to start moving the stuff into their own files so we don't end up with a giant mess. So let's right click and create a new file. It's going to be a Swift file here, and I'll go ahead and just call it a bus.swift. Go ahead and create it. We'll paste in that code we cut. And then now let's go ahead and create another new file, and I'm going to go ahead and call this events.swift. And the idea is that we want our bus to be type safe. So we want to create, first and foremost, a struct called an event. And basically, every single event is going to have an identifier and perhaps a result. So actually, instead of even a struct, what you could also do if you want to get a little fancier is create a protocol called an event. And every event will have, like I said, an identifier of type string. That should be a colon. And then you can structure this a little differently, but what we are going to do here, this should be a get. What we are going to do here is we also want our event to have a result. Now this will be a result optional, and we'll see what we need to do in a second to actually populate it. So we'll be able to create a result here. Now it's going to give us an error because a result type should take a success and error type. So we're going to say T and error here. Now T is going to be something generic on our actual protocol. So instead of doing a protocol and making things unnecessarily complicated, let's go ahead and do this. So this is going to take in a result, and it'll take in a result, a identifier as well, which will be optional. Now this is going to take in a initializer, and the initializer will need to pass in a string, just like that. And then we will also need to pass in a result. So this is going to be a comma, just like that. Now what this will allow us to do is pass in a result. So I'll go ahead and drop that right there. And the reason we're using T here is to allow this event to be generic. And we have an error here because we need to say self.identifier is identifier. Now, you can do this through a protocol as well, but it's just going to get a little more complicated. So we're going to stick with a struct. And actually, we can even make this a class since we're going to subclass it. So this is pretty simple. We've got a event, and we might want to call this base event, but now we're going to have more specific event implementation. So I'm going to say subclass of events. So in our case, we want to actually have an event for a user fetch. So what I could go ahead and do is create a user fetch event, which is going to inherit from event, pretty simple. And if we take a look at this, it's going to yell at me because we need to supply a type for T, because event is generic. So if you hit this and hit fix just like that, you can go ahead and say this is any, but in our case, what we actually want this to be is an array of users, because our API call is going to give us back an array of users. So let me go ahead and create a user object here, which is going to be the actual model that we get from the API call, which will have a single property of type name. So what we've basically said here is that this event, this user fetch event, is of type event, and the generic type that we're going to hang on to for the result here is going to be T. Now you could also genericize the error here, however it's not necessary. So what's the point of doing all of this jumping through hoops business? So now what we can do in bus is we can actually say subscribe, and we can say go ahead and subscribe to a particular type of event. So what we will go ahead and say here is we're going to have a enum of event type. And what we can go ahead and do is we can say the first one is a user fetch. And you can hold this stuff in different forms, so we're just going to do it this way. And now we can go ahead and say subscribe to an event, and that'll be of event type. Now we can also go ahead and make our actual subscription functions a little more interesting. We could also say subscribe on the main thread. So how do we actually do that? So we'll say subscribe on main. And once again, this will be the same event. And the only difference now is whenever we post this event, we want to make sure we give it to the caller on the main thread. Now, same thing for the publish. Publish should be able to take in a event, and this event is going to be of type any because it's the generic event that we have created. So we want to be able to publish any. And then in here, we want the magic to actually publish to the subscribers. So now how do we know who has actually subscribed? So we need to not only take in the event that somebody wants to subscribe to, but we also want to take in the callback block. Now this block is going to be an escaping block, and let's just go ahead and create it like this for a quick second. So basically the caller will say, go ahead and subscribe to the user fetch event with the particular block. And let me just go ahead and line break all of this. So cool, looking pretty good. Now what are we actually going to return here? We're going to actually return a event, and this is going to be once again of type any. That's the actual event that we will subscribe to and return in the callback in the closure. And then we also want a similar block parameter in the function down here. So bear with me, we're almost at the part to using all this business. So now that we've actually gone ahead and created both of these functions, we need to hang on to the particular subscription. So what I want to do is we're going to create a struct, and it's going to be inside of this bus, and it's going to be a subscription. And a subscription is going to have a couple things. The first and foremost thing it's going to have is a event type. It's also going to have a thread, and this is going to be a dispatch queue. You can also go ahead and call it a queue. And then finally, it's also going to have a block. And this block is going to be the same thing that we've put down here, which is going to be this closure like so. All right, looking pretty good. So the last thing that we want to do is inside of this bus, we want to hold a private collection of subscriptions. So whenever a calling site tries to subscribe, what we're going to go ahead and do is create one of these subscriptions. Pretty simple. So what I'll do in here is we're going to go ahead and say new, and this is going to be a subscription, and we just want to fill everything out. So type will be type, just like that. This is going to actually be event, I should say, is what we called it in the parameter. The queue will be the global queue that we're going to subscribe to by default, and the block will be the same block that we passed in. And now that we've actually gone ahead and created this, we can go ahead and say subscriptions, which is our array. We're going to go ahead and append the new subscription that we've gone ahead and created. So this should be a private var, which is looking pretty good. Let's see what the problem is here. Looks like this is yelling that I spelled event incorrectly. Looking pretty good. And we're going to do the same thing in the function down below. So in here, we can go ahead and say this is going to be on the main thread. So that's the only thing that actually changes. So now that we've gone ahead and done this, we want to have the publish side of this as well. So we can subscribe and then publish the event. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we want to be able to get out all of the actual subscriptions that care about this particular event. So one way we could do this is by doing a for loop over the subscriptions. The other thing we can do is we could require this to not only give us an event, but also tell us the event type we care about. And the reason we want to do that is because now we can say let subscribers is going to be our subscriptions, and we want to go ahead and filter out. Let's make sure this is lowercase, so it's our array subscriptions, and we want to definitely spell it correctly. So this one right here, we're going to filter out all of the subscribers where the actual type is going to match. So where this equals the type. And now that we have all of those subscribers, we can say subscribers, go ahead and call the block on it. So this is going to be for each, and let's get rid of these parens. Now on this, we can go ahead and say $0.block, and we can actually pass in the particular event. Now, one important thing to know is we would be calling this on whatever thread it was dispatched on. However, our subscription up here allows us to hold on to a queue. So we're going to go ahead and say on, let's go ahead and cut this. We're going to say $0.queue asynchronously go ahead and dispatch that block with a particular event. So let's see why this is yelling at me. Contextual closer cannot infer the type. So here we'll go ahead and say this is a subscriber in. And here we're going to say subscriber.queue, go ahead and invoke subscriber.block. The reason it was complaining is because we had too many nested blocks, so the $0 is getting screwed up. And this is basically our event bus with a pub sub model. Let's actually hook this up to our controller and view model. So cool. So let's see how we would create this. So first and foremost, let me write out the API call here. It's going to be a URL session shared, and we want a data task with a URL as well as a completion handler. This will be data response, and we'll ignore the error because we're doing an example today. We're going to want to unwrap the data, and then we're going to want to try to decode this. I'm going to go ahead and say try to use JSON decoder to decode an array of users from the given data. If something goes wrong, we can go ahead and print out the error, we want to not forget to kick off our actual task here. And once we've actually gotten our users, what we can actually do is instantiate a user fetch event. So we're going to say the event is going to be a user fetch event. And the identifier, we can pass in anything in here. We're just going to create a random identifier. We can say uuid.uuid string, which is just a random ID. And the coolest part is if you take a look at the autocomplete, it knows that we want, in the success case, an array of users because we've genericized the actual events. So we can say we've succeeded and we've got our users. And in the other case, we can actually create an event down here as well. And instead of succeeded, we can go ahead and say we've actually failed with the given error. And then finally, what we want to actually do here is we want to post the event. So instead of actually doing this redundantly, what I could do is I can declare the event up here. We can assign the event inside of each of these respective blocks, just like that. And once we have the events created, we can say bus.shared, and we can go ahead and publish a user fetch with the given event, just like that. And let's see what's going on. We have an error here, and let's see what the issue is. The event here says cannot convert value of event user to expected type of event any. So one thing that's important to understand is the way that generics work is that we need the actual API to allow us to pass in a variety of different types of values. So let's go back to our bus and let's see how we can fix this. So the simplest approach is to make this any of type T, but this T has to be a result, right? So we're going to say that this event is going to be of type generic event. The problem is we want to pass down a user fetch event. So we could actually just make this simpler and just say make this a user fetch event for the time being. You could also go ahead and change this up. So let's see what the issue here is. So here we are saying this will pass a user fetch event cannot convert value of event user to expected argument type event any. And the reason it's complaining here is because our subscription also takes in a event any. Now you could make it any class, but let's once again just make this simpler and go ahead and say that this event is going to take in an array of user objects. Just to make our life simpler, to get this example up and running. And let's see what's going on here. Let's also go ahead and change these because we're going to want to simplify this. We'll talk about how to genericize this if we do good on time, but let's see if all our errors go away. So now that all of our errors have disappeared back in our view controller, we can say go ahead and publish this event. So let's see what's going on now. If I go ahead and hit Command B to build it, let me actually pick a different simulator. So 12 Pro Max is what I'm looking for. All right. And we should see the autocomplete should behave now. Looks like everything is autocomplete highlighting, and we're publishing this. Now, we want to actually move this stuff to our view model. So we should probably create a view model. So I'm going to cut this entire fetch function. We're going to create a view model up here. This is going to be a user list view model. We're going to go ahead and add this fetch data API on here. We'll actually go ahead and call it a fetch user list, which is pretty simple. And what we can now actually do is use this since all of our business logic is in there. So I'm going to go ahead and create an instance of this. So we'll say private let view model is going to be this view model. We're going to also want a table view to actually show our list of users. So I can say this is going to be, let's actually create it as an anonymous closure. So in this block here, we can go ahead and say this is going to be let table will be a table view. Go ahead and return the table view, and we're going to go ahead and register a UI table view cell.self for ID cell, and this should be for a reusable identifier cell, not a header. So we're going to say register a what I'm looking for is this one, cell class, UI table view cell dot self for ID string of cell. And now that we have a table view, we can go ahead and add it here. We're going to assign its frames to be view.bounds. And let's see, we also want to assign its data source, looking pretty good. And let's see what else we need. We want to conform. So we'll say this is table view data source. And we'll need the table view function. So we'll go ahead and just put a comment here. I'll say number of rows will be 0 to start off with. We'll go ahead and hook this up to our view model momentarily. And then our table view is going to dequeue a reusable cell with an identifier. This will be cell, this will be identifier, and that'll be cell. So cool, so now that we've done this, we want to bind our table view to an event on our view model via the bus. So the way we're going to do this is we will say bus.shared, and we want to subscribe on the main thread to a particular event type. This will be the user fetch, and the block here is going to give us a event. Now what we can do in here is we're going to say go ahead and switch on the event.results. In the success case, we'll get an array of actual users. We'll just do break for now, and then in the failure case, we'll get an error where we will print out the error. Now, what do we actually want to do on the success? Well, we want to refresh our table view, but we also want to hang on to our users. So where do we actually want to hang on to our users? We should probably put them in our view model here. So we can actually go ahead and say there is going to be a public var users, which will be an array of users just like that. And now in here, we can go ahead and say view model that users is users, and we can also say self.tableview.reload data. Now we also want to go ahead and capture weak self here to make sure that we don't cause a memory leak. We're already on the main thread because we're subscribing on the main thread as we see here. And we just want to hook up our table view. So we can now say viewModel.users.count, and the cells text label text is going to be viewModel users at the nth element dot name. So hopefully everyone followed along. So let's see what errors we have and let's fix them. So view model is on self, so we're going to say self optional dot view model dot users. Let's see if I made this correct. So let's go ahead and make this a var so it's mutable. Now we can assign to it, looking pretty good. And let's see what the error here is. We're switching on the event.result. Now the result might be nil. So what we want to go ahead and do is we want to unwrap it. So we're going to say results is event.results. The reason we made it optional is in case you want to have a nil result as a result of something that happened in your bus, one of your events. So let's go ahead and run this, and then let me talk through it again because we jumped around quite a bit, and then we'll also talk about generics. So if we go ahead and run this in a simulator, we should see that we get a list of our users. So nothing fancy here, perhaps. Actually, we're not going to see it yet because I forgot to call fetch. So we're going to go ahead and say view model fetch users. So go ahead and do that. And once our users have been fetched and everything is good to go, our bus will actually post the event, and here is our list of users. So it's definitely working, but let me go ahead and talk through the benefits of doing this way. So for those of you that might be familiar with the Redux pattern or the the combine and RX Swift patterns, this might look familiar. But this is a your own implementation, so it gives you a lot of flexibility. So what do I mean by that? Well, first and foremost, we have an event here that we've created, which is generic, but we have our subclasses. Now notice user fetch event doesn't have anything in it. If we wanted to, we could definitely go ahead and add some more information on here. Perhaps we want to say go ahead and add a created, right? We want to hang on to in this class when the user fetch actually happens. So this inheritance approach with generic types lets us have a common contract for our events, but it also gives us the flexibility to extend them as we see fit. So moreover, we also had changed this to take in our actual bus just a user fetch event instead of a generic any. Now the reason we did that is because generics can get a little complicated, and I actually don't think I'm going to go through it in this video. I've got a separate video on generics, so if you're interested on how to make this taken any instead of like users as a collection in a hard-coded fashion, take a look at that video. But the idea here is you want the event to be reusable. Now in our actual bus here, you notice that we were able to separate out subscribing on the current global thread or on the main queue, or I should say global queue and main queue. Now this is the flexibility that this approach affords to you, where you can standardize the concurrency and threading models and patterns and behaviors in your project. Same thing for subscribing. If we wanted to, we could add another function here, and it could be for publishing, I should say, publish if needed, right? So let's say there are multiple subscribers, which is the same object for the same event. Generally, that object won't need the published result multiple times, so we can put all that logic in the bus and not have to do one-off implementations at the actual subscription site, which is our view controller in our case. And the last thing I'll leave you guys here with is all of our business logic here is in our view models. We could actually go ahead and put this in its own file. And in this case, that's actually going ahead and making the API call. So we'll go ahead and create a view model.swift. I'll go ahead and just paste that in. And we're looking good. So this fetch user list has no callback. It's going to use our actual bus to either post an event for a successful fetch, or it'll post an event for our actual failure. Now, we didn't really use the identifier. We're just passing in a random string. But if you wanted to, tie some custom logic to a particular identifier, you certainly could do so. It's just a good practice for logging and for all of these events to have a unique ID. So that's all I've got for you guys today. There's quite a few flavors of MVVM. I've done a bunch on this channel. Let me know what you guys think of this approach. If we hit Command B, that error should go away. It's definitely a different approach than some of the other binding examples out there. If you haven't liked the video already, don't forget to do so. Super appreciated. And subscribe to the channel if you're into iOS and Swift. We actually just hit 25K subs, so super pumped about that. Thanks for everyone that watches and has stuck around. I'll see you all in the next video.